So I have had 6 careers. I've been in human resources, I've been a consultant, I've been a trainer, I've been in population health, I've been in sales, I've been a counselor, and I've had 20 jobs more than. So over the years, it really became a habit of me to help family and friends do a job search, just a side gig. And like many folks, right as lockdown happened, I lost my job, laid off. And the pandemic unemployment was great. It gave me a second to take my breath and uh, figure out what to do next. And so I really decided that because of the state of the world, and what I anticipated and what we were seeing as a real mental health crisis, I decided to go back to my roots as a counselor, do the career coaching as a vocation instead of avocation, and see if I could help people instead of in a population health broad spectrum, really start digging in with people one-on-one individually and to see if I could change lives doing that. So it's been great. I started back up last year. I am a teletherapist, mostly doing virtual therapy, and then career coaching, as well as something I call life strategy. So helping people make decisions, solve problems about what to do with their lives. So thanks for having me here and to present this topic on Blueprint for a Well-Lived Life. So I love this quote: when the personality comes to serve the purpose of the soul, that is authentic power. Gary Zukov, who's kind of a spiritual guru author here in the States. And I love this quote because I think it embodies what we're all trying to do, right? We're trying to know who we are, what our skills, our talents, our gifts are, our innate abilities, and use that everything, use the whole of ourselves to show up in the world. And so let's talk about some real numbers. 27% of college grads, only 7% are working in a field related to their major. 2/3 of people are unhappy with their jobs. 15% actually hate their jobs, and 69% of workers are disengaged. Over 125,000 work hours in a lifetime. So when I do life coaching, even counseling with people, career coaching, our lives and our work are intricately interwoven. And because we spend so much of our life at work, work has a tremendous impact on our happiness, our relationships. And so the goal really is to take who you are, what you believe, what your values are, and what you do to create the ideal situation, the ideal job. So let's start with who you are. So I use some tools when I do career coaching. I use some assessments. I do a DISC, which is looking at what skills are suited to your natural abilities. I have folks get a Strength Finder book, take that quiz, and that's really what your greatest gifts are, what your innate abilities are. And then a Myers-Briggs or personality test. And really the Myers-Briggs tells us how you relate to the world around you and who you are when you're in relationship with people. And what do I do with these assessments? What do you do with these assessments once you have all this information? I mean, it really is self-knowledge, right? Sometimes we don't have a very good view of who we are objectively when we show up in the world. And a lot of people have aha moments, but mostly it's for validation and clarification. It's like, oh, yeah, that is actually who I am. Those are my traits. That is how I interact with the world. That is my preference. I am extroverted. I am introverted. And we begin to recognize themes. And we take all of that information, all of the language from all of the assessments, we use it for resume writing, to write cover letters, but really the most important piece is that you then have language for talking to people about yourself, right? That's the hardest thing. We don't want to come across as braggy, but we want to know ourselves, how we work best, what kinds of environments are best for us, what kind of management style we prefer, what kind of work environment is best for us. And then we use that in interviews to talk about ourselves and also ask questions to glean whether or not the place we're interviewing and the people we're interviewing with are a good fit for us. So let's talk about what we believe. So I use a curriculum by BoulderNet and Dave Evans. It's a book and a workbook. They are design educators from Stanford University. And back in the day, they created a class at Stanford for college kids about designing your life. And it became the most popular class at Stanford. So of course they did what any smart people will do, and they wrote a book and created a training program, and they travel all over and they train people on how to use their design thinking method to help people figure out how to create a life that works for them. And so there's different kinds of thinking, right? There's engineering thinking, which is solve your way forward. There's business thinking, optimize your way forward. Research thinking, I'm looking at you, Scott, analyze your way forward. And then there's design thinking, build your way forward. And typically design thinking are used to develop products and services. But what Bill and Dave have done is they've created this workbook, this process to help you discover what you believe, right? So they talk about life view. And these are the questions that you answer when you're in the workbook and you're jotting down, or I have you do this exercise in career coaching. What is the meaning or purpose of life? Where do family, community, and the rest of the world fit in? What are the roles of joy, sorrow, justice, injustice, love, peace, and strife in life? What are the roles of those? What is the relationship between the individual and other people? And is there a higher power for you? And if so, what impact does that have on your life? So you answer all those questions, not a long exercise, maybe 30 minutes to answer, just off the top of your head. And then we switch to what is your work view? Why do you work? What defines good and worthwhile work for you? What do experience, growth, and fulfillment have to do with it? How does work relate to you as an individual, to others, and to society? And then what does money have to do with it? So again, you've answered all these questions. You now have your life view and your work view, and it becomes something that's called your true north, right? You marry those two things together, that becomes your compass, and those two things always point to your true north. And so what we look at to determine that is, how do your work view and your life view complement one another? Where do they clash? And does one drive the other, and how? So these are questions that you answer for yourself. It's very, very subjective, based on your own lived experience, based on where you are at any moment. And we need to revisit it periodically, right? Because we change and evolve as people. So as we change and evolve as people, our needs, wants, and desires change as well. So a word on passion, just a little sidebar here. Passion is never the starting point. Like, people say, just do what you're passionate about and you'll never work a day in your life. I just really hate that. I just think that is such bullshit. It should never be the starting point. It really takes years of living in the world, experiencing life to know where you fit. But here are some indicators of what is not your passion. You are bored. You're not willing to stay late at work. You're not looking to increase your skills or perfect them. You're not curious about what's going on in the field, and you're not curious about what other people are doing in the field. And look, I say this with a little bit of caveat, because some people, a job is just a job. And Rebecca, you mentioned your work needs to be purpose-driven, and not everybody feels that way. Some people just want to do their job and go home and have the two be separate. So for those of us who think my work needs to have meaning and purpose, I need to feel satisfied and fulfilled, often we get into this kind of mythical idea of, I need to be doing what I'm passionate about. That's just not the case. You can enjoy your job and love your job, and it can also not be your passion. So what are we really after with work? Daniel Pink, best-selling author of Drive, he's got some great books, and here's what he's done with his research. Here's what he's discovered. Higher incentives AKA money, actually lead to worse performance. And the 3 keys to high job satisfaction are actually mastery, autonomy, and purpose. It's, do we feel capable at our jobs? Do we have some independence to make decisions? And does it have meaning for us? And those are really what leads to job satisfaction and high job performance. So more myths, right? We need to debunk this idea of work-life balance. For those of us sitting in the room who have families and have worked for a really long time, this notion of work-life balance is just garbage. It's the worst idea ever. I'm at a place in my life, I'm an empty nester. And so my work life is the brunt of my life. When I was a single mom with 2 young kids, my life had carried more weight. It was definitely a bigger part of my life than it is now. So this myth that we're going to achieve some sort of balance is just, it's not true. It's not true. And we can't keep operating as if it is. There's never going to be a balance. It's always, the scales are always going to be tipped. But what I love about BoulderNet and Dave Evans is they've created this dashboard, and feel free to steal this. If I gave you this exercise, I would have you fill in this bar across from left to right and tell me how full each of these things were in your life. I would even add another bar called family to that. And the idea is that for you, subjectively, what does a healthy dashboard look like? Are you working so much that in fact your relationships, your romantic love life, it has suffered, and so you don't have enough love? Are you so overworked that you have very little play? Is work completely full to the exclusion of everything else? And as a result, is your health suffering? And are you not able to spend enough time with family? So really the exercise is for you to fill this in, acknowledge where you're out of balance, and then bring all of those to a place that subjectively make you feel like this is what balance looks like for me. My family life is full, but it also, I don't have kids at home, so I don't have to devote a ton of my time and energy to my family life. So let's talk about what you do. Perfection is the enemy of good enough. I think this is a Voltaire quote. I say that with a question mark because people don't really know, but often I hear this from my career coaching clients all the time. I need to find the perfect job. I need to figure out what's the perfect job for me. And there just isn't a perfect job. There's many, many jobs that can be perfect enough or good enough, but to hold up this ideal of it needs to be the perfect job is just not realistic. So now what? So you have these assessments, you've done your work view, you've done your life view, you've done your dashboard, you've figured out like where you're out of balance, where you need to make changes, and what do you do with it? So this is where you start making a plan. You start narrowing it down to jobs, to industries, and we use more design thinking here. And look, there are no wrong answers. Everyone gets really caught up and I need to do the right thing. I need to do the right thing. And there just are no wrong answers. There are so many things, like Rebecca, you had said, like, it's kind of broad. I have all these areas I'm interested in, and that's totally okay, because there are different versions of you and different stories that you could live out with your job search and where you end up. That would be absolutely fine. And perfect enough. It would be a great fit. And so we need to make sure that we aren't shooting on ourselves, and there are no wrong answers here. There are many versions of ourselves. And so the question is, what do I want to grow into, or who do I want to grow into being? You live the current version of yourself, right? Whatever movie is currently playing at the Cinemax, that's where you're operating from. That's how you determine what your next best step is. And none of those versions of where you're standing now and where you're going to stand in the future are wrong. They're all right. Many, many stories and unfolding of our chapters can happen over our lifetime. So in design thinking, there's this thing called prototyping. And so what is a prototype in design? It's really a product built to test ideas and changes until it resembles the final product. So if you're designing a cell phone, right, you're gonna kick out a prototype and you're gonna test it out, and oh, that one doesn't work in this area. So you kick out a new prototype until you refine, and you come up with your final product. This happens in industrial design, product design all the time, and we do it as part of my career coaching program, as part of the Designing Your Life curriculum. So a good prototype is cheap to construct, fast to implement, and helps us learn. So let me give you an example. Let's say that owning a restaurant is your biggest fantasy. You've always thought, man, it would be so cool to own a restaurant. What is a way that you could prototype owning a restaurant, right? You could go to your favorite restaurant, talk to the chef or talk to the GM and say, hey, could I shadow you for a day? Could I just see what a day in the life looks like of running a restaurant? Or maybe you could take a job as a host or hostess one weekend evening, and see what that kind of life looks like. You're going to be exposed to the work. You're going to be exposed to how it is implemented in the day-to-day and what it looks like. That would be a good example of a prototype. Let's talk about informational interviews. So prototyping is a conversation that you have, not looking for a job, right? So Scott, I'm thinking of your example, right? You've done research and development in the bioscience field, but you kind of want to be more customer facing, and just take your MBA and take your research and development experience and do something different, right? So for you, I'm thinking you would identify someone who's actually doing that job. And you would reach out to them and not say, I want to do an informational interview, but I'd like to hear your story, right? I'm really curious. How did you get to be doing this? What's it really like to be doing it? What do you love about it? What do you hate about it? And what does your day or do your days look like? And the great thing about approaching people and saying, can I hear your story of how you got here, is that people love to talk about themselves. We love it. We feel honored, and we want to talk about how we got to this place in our lives. So then use your own imagination, right? If you have more than one avenue, more than one thing you're thinking of doing, write it down. What's the story? What's the ideal for you? Be very, very specific. I do this a lot with really young people who are like 23, they're just out of college, they have this degree, they don't even want to do what they went to school for, and they just don't know what to do. So I have them map it out. What time of the day do you get up? What's ideal? Do you commute? Who do you see every day? What kind of people are you working with? What issues do you bump into? What's your favorite part of the day? What's your favorite part of the week? What part, knowing that no job is perfect, what part of the job is a grind that you could cope with? What do your relationships look like at work and at home as a result of this thing that you think you want to do? And how's the money? Right? So, okay, let's just use the restaurant example. What time do you get up? Well, maybe I get up at 10 or 11 because restaurants are open late. Do you have a commute? Maybe it's in your community. Who do you see every day? Customers eating the food, wait staff, cooks. What issues do you bump into? Supply chain issues, food that goes bad, food safety issues. What's your favorite part of the day or the week? Meeting new people. What part is a grind? Inventory, ordering things, taking care of staffing shortages. How are your relationships? There's a lot of turnover. So can't make friends at work all that well. And how's the money? Well, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. It's kind of up and down. There's no stability. But here's the thing that people sometimes don't think of, is that how does this job fit into the overall picture that you have of your life, right? You may think you want to own a restaurant or even work in a restaurant, but have you thought about the fact that you're going to be at work in the evenings and on the weekends when all of your family is not at work and not at school? And maybe you have friends who do regular 9-to-5 jobs. And when they're off, you're at work. I think these are things that we don't think about sometimes, the actual like in the weeds, nitty gritty of what it means. I know someone who started a business and the business is like a paint and sip, right? If you're familiar with, you go, you drink cocktails and you paint a picture. What he didn't realize was that the times that those people would do that are after working on weekends. And his wife works a traditional 9-to-5 job. So they literally never see each other. But he opened this business. And so now he's got to be committed to it, right? But as a result, his personal life and his relationships have really suffered. He works when everyone else is off. And so it feels very isolating. And it's not quite the lifestyle he was going to have. He was really excited about being an entrepreneur and doing his own thing. But it's becoming tough for the rest of his life. So continuing with this idea of this narrative you're creating about what you potentially want to do. Think about, okay, you're 2 to 3 years into it. You're feeling good about it. Write down, what do you think the good is? What's the bad? What compromises have you made? What successes? What does the lifestyle look like? Even go so far as imagining you bump into an old friend on the street and they're like, hey, how's it going? And your response is really good. And here's why. Because here's what my life looks like. Here's how I feel fulfilled and satisfied with what's going on in my life as a big picture, my work life and my personal life. So decision-making time, y'all. Let's talk about the decision process. How do we make good decisions? So we gather and create options. And this idea of the wise mind is really something from the psychotherapy world, this idea of how our minds work and how we make good decisions. So to create the best circumstance for making a good decision, you have to marry content from your logical mind, your IQ, with your emotional mind, EQ. You can never just solely make a decision based on pure logic. I'm going to make the best decision with all these objective criteria, because that's the way we make decisions, right? This would be like an engineering mind. Like logically, I'm going to go down this path. It's going to be very objective, and that's how I'm going to make the best decision possible. The problem with that is that our gut and our emotional intuition gives us a lot of content, right? If you're not bouncing options against your gut to see how that feels, you're not going to make a good decision. That content is really, really important. We also can't just make a decision based on our gut feeling. Well, it feels like the best decision. We have to bring those two pieces together. We have to put correct data in the logical mind, right? Don't just make stuff up. A lot of people have thoughts and ideas that just aren't accurate. And I'll give you an example of that. I'm not smart enough to do this job. I don't have the credentials. I can't make it happen, right? Is that true? Is that objectively true? Or do you in fact have, if you scoured your job history and your experience and your education, do you in fact have those skills? I mean, maybe I haven't done a customer facing role. Maybe I've been in a lab, but there are pieces and parts of my job where I'm interacting with people and interpersonal relationships, and customers are good and happy. So make sure the information that you're gathering for the logical mind is accurate. When you have accurate information in the logical mind, your emotional mind will base your thoughts and feelings on that accurate data. And then what you do is you distill those two things down to our wise mind. Okay, based on the logical data, based on how I feel when I bounce it against my gut, I'm going to make a decision with my wise mind. Okay, so then once you have list of options, you narrow them down, right? There's something called choice paralysis, and they've done, little experiments with this over the decades, like even involving jam. Like they would go to a store and you would have 4 choices of jam that they were selling, or 20 choices of jam that they were selling. And they found that when people had 20 jams to choose from, they didn't buy. It didn't convert into sales. But when they had 5 to 6 choices, typically they would leave with a bottle of jam, a jar of jam, right? So too many choices, more than 7, bad. 5 to 6 choices, good, right? So then we narrow it down. Then we pick one. Which story is right for you? And keeping in mind, there's more than one of you in there, right? There's more than one storyline that you can follow. Now it's time to pick one. So then what happens after you pick it? You agonize, right? Oh, have I made the right decision? Is this the right decision? No, I'm kidding. This isn't part of the decision process. This is what people think is part of the decision process, but it really isn't. Agonizing, suffering, ruminating on it, obsessing about it is not required. It is not necessary. So number 4 is let go and move on. Live into the decision that you make. Do not keep your options open. Having a reversible condition is not conducive to creating happiness, right? If we think we can bail at any moment and go do something else, we never fully commit to the decision that we make. So make the decision. Grab it 100% and go with it, right? I'm not a sports person, but I'll use this analogy. You take the football and you run for the goalpost. You can't drop the football and decide, I'm going to go play soccer because that's better for me right during a game. Doesn't work that way. So this is the result, all the way back to the beginning, right? After you do all of these things, you create a life that makes sense. Who you are, what you believe, what your values are, right? You've now dug into what your values are, what's important to you in your work life and your personal life, and what you do. They all create this beautiful Venn diagram, right, in the center. That's the goal, is that middle part. Until it doesn't work, until you need to revisit. And people have an average of 4 to 5 careers in their lifetime, and our parents who may have worked for the same company and been in the same career, you all know, like working for a company for 30 years just isn't the reality anymore. Often we need to make a change to do something different because our company sees us doing one thing and they don't want us to be doing something outside of that because we're so good at it. Or we often need to bounce companies in order to get a promotion or even to get a different salary. So look, you make the decision and you go with it and you keep going with it and you commit to it until it doesn't work. And then you go through a reevaluation process and make a different decision. I talked really fast. Tell me if you have any questions. Yeah, go ahead.
It's more of a comment than it is a question. Thank you so much. This is so helpful. Especially some of the pain points that you brought up. Like, it's really nice to have a reminder that it's, you can make a decision and just kind of go with it. Yeah, it's because the second guessing and all that stuff is just such a waste of energy. So I just, yeah.
Torture.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it really is.
yes,
Thank
it's
you.
torture.
Yeah, I really
Yeah,
appreciated all of that. And I love the
yeah,
book, Designing Your Life. I've been slowly working through it and
yeah.
I've been finding it to be super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I use a lot of those tools, and then all of those tools, of course, get funneled into the tactics and logistics, right? Creating the LinkedIn profile, job search setup, interview questions, resume wordsmithing, cover letter, all of that. All of that is kind of the background, the structure for then this is how it actually happens in real life, right? We're on Andrew Hudson's, we're on LinkedIn, we've got an all-star profile. And I was thinking of you, Scott, in your resume, because I often tell people it tends to be a little more of a good analogy for younger folks who are on dating apps. I tell people about their resume, write your resume like you're writing your dating app profile, and you're really trying to attract the perfect mate, right? By what you say about who you are. So, Scott, creating your resume in such a way that you're attracting the job that you want, right? By saying what lingo, putting the words in your resume that would attract that to you. It's super important. I've redone my LinkedIn profile like 80 times because every time I've made a pivot in my life, I have to present myself almost as a different person, right? That this is the narrative of my present reality. And I think we get really focused on, oh, well, my resume and my LinkedIn need to actually be listing out what was in my job description, right? The bullets of the things that I did. But actually, we get to have some creative license there and create a narrative that fits the journey we want to do next, right? Our next chapter. We can really form it in such a way that it seems like the next logical step, right? Like, Amy, I'm thinking of you, like you've had experience that absolutely you could create a narrative that you 100% have the experience to be a small business coach doing EOS, for sure, right? You just got to create that narrative. And it's not a false narrative. You're not making it up. You're just creating this story, this book about how your experience, your work experience leads to that being the next best step. That of course you're a small business consultant because you've been doing this, right?
I appreciate you saying that. Curious what kind of word tense you would use. Like all of the words of this is what I've done in the past and this is what I did. So creating this narrative and this story about this is what I do or want to do.
Yeah.
What kind of a word tense would you suggest?
Well, look, if you're doing your resume and it's a job that you're not doing anymore, I mean, following good grammar, right? You want to use past tense. When you're in a cover letter, or you have a little summary maybe on your resume, you would use present, right? I am a professional who has XYZ number of years of experience in helping companies use EOS to create successful small businesses, right?
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah, it does. I'm thinking through my LinkedIn profile because I had actually, another thing I'm interested in is professional organization. And I reached out to a gentleman who owns his own company and I wanted to get his story, not necessarily, can I come work for you? That'd be great to get a little bit of experience, but it was more that. And so unbeknownst to me, he went out to my LinkedIn profile and he said, we already have one of you and we're thankful for what you do. But I was like, wait. I just want to talk and have your story and network. So where I'm looking at is those things are going to happen. And I want to make sure that it's time to kind of do a revamp of what's on there so that I can make sure that I'm presenting myself appropriately for what I do want to be doing. So that's why I was thinking through just word tense, not necessarily the overall resume listing of tasks that I've done.
Yeah. I mean, when you're doing your LinkedIn profile and you're talking about what you've done in other jobs, instead of bullet pointing it, you can have it be a narrative. You can have it be 2 small paragraphs and have it absolutely be geared toward if you want to work for a PEO, use that lingo, right?
Mhm.
Go out and look at job descriptions of PEOs and start using their language and formulate, just 2 or 3 sentence paragraphs on what you did at that company that would fit with working at a PEO. It's
Okay.
harder to do on LinkedIn, right?
Mhm.
Because, you're using it to attract a couple of different kinds of career paths, potentially easier to do in having different versions of a resume.
Sure.
So, you might have to be really creative in your wordsmithing on LinkedIn to make it fit either with small business consulting or, working for a PEO. What you don't want to do is if you really are not looking to do operations, don't make your LinkedIn sound like you're an operations person, because that's all you're going to attract.
Sure.
Mhm.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Anybody else?
It's fantastic. Yeah, I mean, one of the thoughts I had was, I've always thought of the job search in such a permanent, with so much permanence, I guess I should say.
Yeah.
But my last job I was in it for 15 years, right? But nowadays, I think people kind of see jobs as much more of a temporary,
That's
jobs,
right. Yeah.
right? And I think that's a much healthier mindset, right?
Yeah.
And therefore, every job is a prototype, right? If you go into it that way, not that you should see stuff as being casual, but
Right.
then if you kind of have some flexibility in it,
That's right.
then there's less. You can be braver, right?
That's right. That's right.
It's
not permanent like a marriage, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. I mean, the average job tenure is 2 to 4 years.
Right.
Even less for millennials and younger. Sometimes they're job hopping every year. So, yeah, it's not a marriage. It's not a marriage. There's not permanence to it that we, at least, some of us older folks think like, oh, I've got to make this one decision. I've got to stick with it for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I guess I was going to say that. And then in terms of the resume thing, when I mentioned earlier, when I first went to the Workforce Center, Deb kind of said, this resume is a great, summary of you, but as a resume, not so much. And, my big takeaway was, in terms of paradigm, was that, the job ad was really sort of a RFP, request for proposal, and that my resume should be the proposal, right? A tailored proposal to that RFP, right?
That's right.
In terms of just a paradigm, right? And then when I got that paradigm shift, it was, I think my quality of my resumes went up considerably, right? Because after that, every resume was very tailored, very responsive to the keywords in the resume, but blah, 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 right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, you wrote the appropriate story for each job.
Exactly. Yeah. So, any other thoughts for Nancy? Or questions for Nancy?
No, that's very good. Thank you very much, Nancy.
Yeah, thanks so much, you guys, for having me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, fantastic presentation. Any other thoughts for the meeting, or we're kind of at our 10:30 time? Yeah, just should we bring the meeting to a close, or any other, or just any other networking, any other thoughts for each other?
And Trent, you can stop recording.
Okay.